Peace and welcome to the Atlantis School for Gifted Youngsters. Thanks for watching and subscribing to our channel.
So continuity care, what is that? By definition, continuity of care is used to describe programs and policies that ensures children and families are consistently engaged in high quality growth and development experiences through stable relationships. Now, with all of that being said, the key word in that definition is relationships. Because in order to have anything that has a sense of continuity, you have to have consistency, which requires relationships, especially when you're talking about the education of our children and access to resources concerning our families. And you're thinking about institutions or programs and organizations that say that their mission is to provide these type of resources and the sense of stability concerning those type of relationships. So the reason that continuity of care is important, or these relationships are important, because number one, there's a chronic scarcity of resources within inner city and rural communities. Right now in the United States, we're currently going through the process of our national census, right? And a lot of times when people look at the census, they're like, man, why I gotta fill out this information and all this other stuff? And they really don't see the importance of that. The census as an institution or an organization was established in the early 1900s. And the goal of the census organization is, it's a federal organization. So the goal is to collect data from various different states so that the federal government can effectively distribute resources to support those states based upon their population size or their municipalities. So certain resources are allocated to states based upon the population that is accounted for in those states. So for example, imagine you live in not even a state, but a municipality within a state, and you have citizenry that is not participating in the census. So you know that there may be approximately, say it's a small municipality, approximately 60,000 people that live there. But yet, less than 30,000 citizens participate in the census data. It further compounds it if you represent a segment of the population that are the small demographic. So say you represent indigenous people, or you represent Asian community members, or you represent so-called African Americans, or other different minority groups, and your group have not participated in the census. Because as a whole, the citizens in that municipality haven't really participated in it, what that does is it tells the federal government that you don't need 60,000 allocated resources because you don't have that population size. So on a federal level, we're only going to distribute this amount of resources to your municipality. When that happens, not only do the majority of the population that represent the larger demographic lose out, but the minority population really loses out. So in other words, when America has a cold, minority populations usually have the COVID-19, or they have the flu. It's much more worse because as a minority group, your voice and your interests and your concerns are already not being taken into consideration because you don't represent the majority, you know? So this chronic scarcity of resources is also reflective of a lack of continuity of care, because it's a lack of relationships a lot of times with the municipality's government, locally or regionally, in certain segments of the population. And like I said, we're going through the current census, and when You have groups that don't participate in that. It further compounds the fact that there's going to be more of a chronic scarcity of resources on a federal level and then also on a state level. So building those relationships in terms of a continuity of care is important in terms of being able to advocate for those type of resources, in order to lobby in terms of having a collective voice for the needs of our community members. And it's an effective method in order to help address some of those issues. Another reason why continuity of care is important is because you oftentimes also see a lack of programs and policies that are culturally competent and anti-bias. Again, if you come from a community of people who are of a minority group, a lot of times people are not even taking into consideration what you think or how you feel about anything. And what they give you is what they give you. It's not based upon a lot of times your own input of what is necessary. That shows you a clear lack of relationships when you see a lack of cultural competence, as well as people who are biased in how they approach you. Single US mothers head over 80% of 12 million single parent households. That also shows that there is a lack of continuity of care for various different reasons. The high-risk times of juvenile delinquency are between the hours of about 3 and 7. That's typically the time that people get involved, youth in particular, with behavior that is considered delinquent or at risk, right? When you look at a lot of the programs that, or initiatives that are available, latchkey programs, other different type of after school programs, those are important because a lot of times those time frames that they're offered are the time frames when youth may not have certain things to do or certain type of activities, and they're more likely to get involved in certain activities, such as sexual activity. Here in my city, in New York State, my city is one of the highest cities in terms of sexually transmitted diseases and teenage pregnancy rates. That also shows a lack of stable relationships being established. Why youth may find themselves getting involved in different things, because there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of projects, programs, initiatives, and oftentimes just a lack of supervision. One of the other reasons that building those type of stable relationships are important is because sedentary lifestyles. Millennials have the dishonor of being considered the first generation that will not outlive their parents, right? So if you look at the life expectancy of past generations, this generation here is considered the one that will not actually outlive their parents. And that has a lot of factors, a lot of variables to that. Part of it is that sedentary lifestyle, meaning that a lot of the younger people today are not as active as they used to be in terms of optimum health and being concerned about their diets and other different aspects of their livelihood or their quality of life. Doesn't have the same degree of consideration as past generations, and it's actually affecting them. And it's not to say that these are just ideas that millennials come up with on their own. This has been something that has been an atrophy of the human condition for some generations, where now you have the present generation who are dealing with the responsibility and the cost of decisions that we've made prior to them being on the planet. But again, it shows you that there's a lack of relationships being built in order to transmit the proper information so that they're rightly guided to develop a better quality of life. So all of these and various different other reasons are why continuity of care is important.